Hello, everyone. My name is Terry Bonet, and I'm the Mary's Mills Executive Director here in the US. By the way, today is my 1-year anniversary in this role. I cannot think of a better way to spend this day than hearing the important message from our CEO and founder, Magnus MacFarlane-Barrow, and our Senior Content Manager, Shona Shea. We want to share this update because the details of the crisis in Ethiopia are not being covered by the media because they haven't been able to get government permits to get into Tigray. Magnus, Shona, and a few other team members were granted entry to visit our local feeding program partner, the Daughters of Charity. They're going to share an inside perspective of what's happening in Tigray. After hearing their update, if you feel compelled to help us continue our work in Tigray, we're going to share several ways that you can help. A little housekeeping before we get started. Today's event is being recorded, so we can share it directly after this call. Everyone who signed up will receive an email with a link to that recording. With respect to everyone's time, we want to try and keep this webinar under 60 minutes. Please use your Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to submit any questions that you may have. Please make sure to include your name, state, and country that you're calling in from. We have many people on the call from the US and Canada. We want to make sure that as we wrap up our Q&A session, if there's any questions that we weren't able to get to, that we're able to reach out after this call. And we want to make sure that we've connected you to the right place, whether it's in the US or Canada. Now I would love to turn this focus over to Magnus and Shona for their important update.
So I guess, first of all, just to introduce myself, as Terry said, my name's Shona and I work in the communications team for Mary's Meals International, based here in Glasgow in Scotland. It's a real honour to be with you today, so thank you so much to everybody who's come along, particularly because one of the things that we've been struggling with, to be honest, as part of this campaign, an emergency response, trying to raise awareness about what's happening for the crisis in Ethiopia, is that we just haven't been getting the attention that we would have expected. We haven't had the kind of pickup. There's obviously so many other causes that people want to support and that are in the news right now, that we've been finding it more difficult than we expected, to be honest, to really bring people's attention to it and to get people to care about what's happening. So I just wanted to thank all of you who came along and who did care enough to be here. I'm saying this evening, but I know it's earlier for most other people on the call. I think when we try to get the crisis in Ethiopia to stand out for people, what is always the case with Mary's Meals, and it's the same for this campaign, is it's those individual stories. It's the individual stories of the children. Certainly from my experience, having been there, that's what stands out to me, and all of the individual kids that we met there. When I first came back from Tigray a couple of months ago, I was sharing some photographs from the visit, and one of my colleagues in the communications team remarked that there were some photos of this little boy called Solomon, and she said that they were the saddest eyes of a child she'd ever seen. And sadly, that was what we found everywhere in Tigray. That Solomon there. We were in a different school, Gendet Primary School, where they're not receiving Mary's Meals, and one of the community elders stood up and he spoke very movingly about the situation and the level of hunger there. He talked about the fact that there had been a kind of medical investigation to measure the levels and understand the levels of malnutrition in the community, and something like 30 children had been marked as red on the arm circumference test that measures levels of significant malnutrition. And so they knew that, and they knew that's what the situation was in the community, and yet there hadn't been any help, no support had come. And so he said that when he stood up and spoke, this community elder said, "People are dying in our community. You can see it in the faces and in the eyes of our children." And that was, as I say, the situation where we we find in everywhere where we went in Tigray. We are using words like horrific and catastrophic and devastating, and of course it's all of those things. But again, it's kind of the simple stories and the simple things that I heard while there that have really stayed with me. So I thought I'd share just a couple of them with you. One is that little boy Solomon. So he's at a school called Ara Primary School, where unfortunately we're not currently serving Mary's meals. And we were speaking to him and we were trying to understand a bit more about his situation. And him and his family have been through a horrific set of circumstances in the past few years during the conflict. And at the end of our kind of conversation, I asked him about a feeding program, and he'd heard about it in other communities. He understood what it was, and I said, what difference would this make? Would it help you? What kind of impact would it have if you could receive meals in school? And he just said it would make me happy. And then there was another school that we went to, where they're also not receiving Mary's meals when we were there. And we drove up to the school, and all these students had come out to visit, to meet us, to greet us. And I say all of them, but there was about half of the number of students that should have been there. I think the enrolment for the school used to be over 1,000, and there was something like 500 or 600 kids that had dropped out. So they were begging, or they were working, or they'd left because there's just far too much hunger for them to be able to stay in the community. And as we got out of the car, I could hear this kind of quiet kind of chant, and I couldn't work out what it was. And as we kind of got closer, we realised that it was all of the children holding up these handmade signs, just simply saying, "We need food, we need food, we need food." So those are certainly the things that have stayed with me since the trip, since I've come back and come back to my own kids, and they're talking about, being hungry and wanting multiple snacks a day and thinking, how is this possible in the world that this is happening? One thing I did want to share about one of those schools, Ara Primary School, where Solomon goes, is that while we were there, 15 different families turned up to register their children for school. We were only there as to kind of explore the situation at the school, to understand a bit more about what was happening. We weren't there to kind of promise that the feeding program was coming, but such is the level of hope in that community, such is the level of kind of desperate hunger there, that just in that short visit of a few hours, 15 different families turned up and said they wanted to bring their children to school there. So it just shows you, that's a school that's on our list. We know about it. We want to start feeding there. We would be able to start feeding there. We just need the funds to be able to get to that school and to get to children like Solomon. The other thing I wanted to share, and it might seem a bit at odds with what I've said so far, is just to tell you a little bit about a different event that happened while we were in Tigray. And it was a kind of welcome ceremony, thank you ceremony. Now, having done quite a few visits, I've been very privileged to do that with Mary's Meals over the years. And you quite often there's some sort of event or ceremony, and you're expected to make speeches, and there's maybe kind of, thank you speeches and performances from kids and things like that. And it's always a huge privilege, but it can feel quite uncomfortable at times, because you certainly don't feel like you have earned it or deserve it, and it can feel a little bit, like I say, sort of uncomfortable for that reason. And what was really special about this one was that we'd spent time with our partner in Tigray, and we'd been with them all week, and while we'd had a lot of kind of laughter in the evenings and things, the situation that they've been through over the past few years and the situation that they're facing now, it's just beneath the surface. So it doesn't take much to speak to some of the people in the partner, and to just see that raw emotion of how much suffering they're experiencing and they have experienced. So to go into this event and see this singing and dancing, and it was one woman in particular. I mean, I try, it's very important when you're there to not let your emotions get in the way of things. And so I normally manage to keep, quite together. But there was a woman there, one in particular, and she was just singing and dancing with such joy on her face. It was such an authentic, huge smile. And I just felt so completely moved by it. And the reason is that it's a celebration of Mary's Meals. That's what it was. That's where that, that joy for her came from. And it was a celebration of every donation that's made, every little act of love that we talk about, every sacrifice that people make to support Mary's Meals, every decision they make to try and support this work. So to be there and to experience that, I just wanted to mention it because I wish you all could have been there, to experience that yourselves. It certainly felt like a huge privilege to be there for that. And then just to kind of finish, I suppose, because I'm conscious of time, I was speaking to a woman called Elizabeth, who, if you follow her work, you'll hear more about her in the coming months for sure. She works for our partner in Tigray, and she's incredible. And I was speaking to her after this event, and I was saying, I felt a bit uncomfortable, and I certainly didn't feel like we kind of deserved that gratitude, because we were absolutely in their debt for this incredible work that they've been doing and continue to do to make Mary's Meals possible. And it was the only time we kind of didn't see eye to eye. And she said that she respectfully disagreed. And I just wanted to, I took notes on what she said, so I just wanted to share it with you. She said, it was a very difficult time in the conflict. Everyone was saying, you've made this up. The problems aren't as bad as you're making them out to be. And this was while children were dying left and right, and Mary's Meals was there with us, without question. The people every day were saying, when there was no food, no one knew what to do. We were able to just get up and provide food, which was critically needed, and that's because we had faith in Mary's Meals. This is a wonderful thing. This is humanity in action. And then as part of that same event, Gabrisha, who works for our partner in Tigray, made a speech, and again, I wanted to share some of his words with you. He said, it was Mary's Meals who first voiced the cries of the innocent people of Tigray. Mary's Meals stands as a beacon of hope and compassion to working together and making a meaningful difference in the lives of conflict-affected and at-risk community members. Standing by us, Mary's Meals presented itself to us and the rest of the world that we were not alone in our time of need. It is a testament to the power of love and compassion and the unwavering dedication of Mary's Meals. It has let us know and remember that we are all connected through our shared humanity to stretch giving hands and make a difference in the lives of vulnerable and at-risk people. We hope you will have a renewed sense of purpose and determination to your selflessness and generous contributions that helps keep food on the table for children in need, ensuring their survival and opening up hope for a prosperous future for our children. So that's just some reflections that I wanted to share with you. I don't know, Magnus, if your audio is back on track. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, can now.
Great. So sorry, everyone, for whatever that technical problem was. I stretched my technical ability by turning everything off and turning it on again, and it worked, thankfully. Sorry about that. I'm having one of those days. I turned up at a hotel here to check in early to do this call, and there was a fire brigade outside and everyone's being evacuated. So I'm having one of those days. So thanks for your patience, and thank you, Shona, for stepping in a different order of events here and doing a wonderful job, as always, of just bringing the people of Tigray close to us, because I think you and I are painfully aware we've had this kind of privilege, I suppose, of being there recently and spending time with the remarkable people there. Maybe, first of all, I'll just step back a little bit and provide some background and some context, which obviously originally we'd planned to do first. And, Tigray's northern Ethiopia, as I'm sure most of you know, it has a population of about 5 million people. This terrible 2-year war, it's estimated that around 600,000 people lost their lives in that conflict. It's actually really hard to understand how little we've heard about it in the world's media, if you care to compare that loss of life with other current conflicts or conflicts of the 21st century. It's a staggering and awful thing in terms of just the number and the percentage of that population that lost their lives. It was a conflict that was marked in a horrible way by the targeting of civilians. Many civilians lost their lives in massacres. It was marked by the use of sexual violence as a weapon of war. Many thousands of women suffering rape, and hunger itself being used as a weapon of war as well. So it would be hard to exaggerate just how devastating, every conflict's devastating, but just how devastating this conflict has been for Tigray. And then when that conflict finally at last ended, the end of 22, we might have, I suppose, had reasonable hope that things had reached their worst and slow recovery could begin and things that would get better. But sadly, it really hasn't worked out that way at all. In fact, things have got worse for several reasons. There's a background reason that we're seeing across all the communities in the poorest parts of the world that we serve Mary's meals in, or two background reasons, I would say, in most of them. One would just be the economic downturn in the world and how we see so many more people in the developing world slipping into acute hunger situations. People who used to just be on the edge, just getting by, buying enough for their families, only just, have fallen over that edge as food prices have gone up dramatically and their income hasn't. So that's affecting Tigray, Ethiopia as a whole, and nearly every country in which we're working in right now. And then there's, changes in climate patterns. So we're seeing in so many different places. And in Tigray now, we're in the 3rd year of severe drought. There's been a very profound change in rainfall patterns there that's completely, has played havoc with their traditional harvest seasons. So all of those factors I've just mentioned on their own would have been terrible for the people of Tigray. But when you combine a catastrophic war with a drought, and then on top of that, not long after the end of the war, the biggest donors to the region suspended food aid because they'd uncovered corruption within Tigray. And that definitely made a catastrophic situation a whole lot worse. That suspension of aid lasted for 10 months and recently was lifted. But the resumption of aid hasn't been at a scale anywhere close to meeting the current needs of the people of Tigray. Today, in Tigray, about 4.5 million people are in acute need of food aid. It's over 90% of the population. One of the first things we did on that visit that Shona's just talked about was visit one of the hospitals, the main hospital in the capital, Mekelle. And it was a very distressing thing to visit hospital wards full of children who are chronically malnourished. And to talk to the doctors there, who described to us how rates of child malnutrition have tripled recently. They said the mortality rate amongst children has increased 5 times over. And they talked with kind of despair about the fact that invariably after caring for these babies and children and sending them homes. Invariably, a month or so later, they would reappear with their mothers just simply because there's not enough food at home. We spent time in the rural areas. 80% of Tigrayans are subsistence farmers. Today in Tigray, less than half of the arable land that's normally under cultivation is currently planted and being cultivated, largely because of that famine situation I talked about, but also because many of the farmers lost everything. They need to begin again during the war, even not having the seeds or the fertilizer or the most basic tools to begin again. So, you know, that clearly points to a hunger situation that isn't going to go away tomorrow. This should actually be the time of plenty, at the time when we are visiting harvest time in Tigray. And yet, right now, many people are starving. But nothing would suggest that we're anywhere near the worst of this situation. And then add to that, there are still about 1 million people who are internally displaced, who've been unable to return to the homes that they fled during the war, and they're living in just the most awful conditions. I would describe, I've been doing this for 20 years now, visited lots of humanitarian disasters, from, you know, the aftermath of the earthquake in Haiti or the tsunami and that affected India before that, and many different conflicts and many different acute hunger situations. And honestly, I've never experienced something as awful as what we just saw and heard and learned in Tigray. So those million displaced people that can't go home, it seems like most of them, many of them, are reduced to begging today, and not just displaced people. That was a common theme of the visit. Everywhere we were visiting, we were talking to people who've been reduced to begging. Many of them, people who owned businesses before the war, before they were displaced, or who were professionals, and now today finding themselves in that situation. In one centre that I think Shona mentioned that we visited, it was what was a school classroom, a fairly large classroom, but in that one classroom are living 220 people. They've been living there for 3 years now, and there's no privacy. People of all ages and different families mixed up together in this room. As you can imagine, all kinds of health issues, mental health issues included, and those people survive now every day by going out in the streets with plastic bags and begging for food. And over again, we heard this thing about people who are begging today, just saying, you know, how incredibly kind the people are of Tigray, and we certainly saw that. It was humbling. People who are hungry, sharing the last of what they have. But also at the same time, the people who are begging, saying the people who used to give us food are reduced to begging themselves now. And it was hard to see hope. You know, everywhere, if you look hard enough, even in the worst situations, I think there's always hope. And certainly the hope that I think that we found most of all was, as well as the people themselves of Tigray, and I'll come back to that, they're truly remarkable, visiting a school where Mary's Meals is being served, several schools where Mary's Meals is being served. And it's just like entering a different world, where children are coming to school, where they're laughing and playing and queuing for food, and not just the children, the teachers, talking to us with joy about the kids being there. Because overall, the situation in terms of education in Tigray today is catastrophic. And maybe I'm using that word a lot, but it's hard to think of other words. So hundreds of thousands of children have dropped out of school in the last few months because of hunger. The education authorities that we met with there said that probably at this stage, 25% of the schools are at imminent risk of closure because there's simply not enough children turning up anymore. And that's worsening all the time. More and more children dropping out. We visited a village, where hundreds of children, that village that Shona mentioned, where families were registering their children just because they knew Mary's Meals was visiting. Hundreds and hundreds of children just in one village out of school. And for me, that was there was lots of things hard to see and to learn about during the visit, but that almost was the low point for me, because we know, and the communities themselves certainly know, that when children stop going to school, hope evaporates. What hope's left of a better future if the kids aren't in school and eating? So I don't think I've ever seen such a stark situation in terms of the desperate need for Mary's Meals, and such a massive impact where we are serving those meals. We had a very, very moving experience in one of those schools where Mary's Meals is served. We met two girls, one of them called Bethlehem and one of them called Amlak. And yeah, here they are here. Thank you. I didn't even know you were going to put that picture up. Thank you. And they're amazing young girls. You can see they are, just even in the photograph, full of life, full of joy, very, very smart, good English. And they were telling us about how the children of their school wouldn't be coming to school without the meals. And they told us a story about how they'd started to see these kids who were begging coming to their school gate every day, and small children amongst them. And they just felt such pity for those children at their school gates. They decided to start sharing half of their Mary's Meals with those kids, and that's what they began to do. And then other kids began to do the same in their school. And it was deeply moving, even telling the story again. It was just so moving at many different levels, hearing those girls tell us that, because it was one of several occasions in Tigray where I was left speechless at the depth of the generosity of the people there, who, as I said earlier, are just sharing everything that they have with each other, and even those young kids choosing to do the same. So it's very moving at that level, that to see that beautiful act of charity happening amongst those children. And it was also moving, of course, just because of that horrible reality of kids, and many of them outside the schools in which we are serving Mary's Meals, in desperate need. And that's never the intention of Mary's Meals, and it certainly isn't part of our intention or plan for children who eat Mary's Meals to feel the need to share it with other children. And one of the main reasons why those children would be outside the school and hungry would be because their schools have closed because of hunger. They're not attending school. So the way that we need to address that and solve that is to expand to those other schools as quickly as we possibly can. And as you know, and thank you for joining this call to hear more about this, for the last few weeks we've been running this emergency appeal to help us do just that, to roll out the programme as fast as we can. Because I should say, even in the midst of this situation, it's so challenging at many different levels, we find ourselves in this position where we, as funding allows, we absolutely can roll out this programme and expand fast. We have the most incredible partner organisation there, local sisters, nuns, who are victims themselves, who've lost many members of their own families during the war, and who yet have just continued to serve the people there in the displaced camps, and running our school feeding programme. And through them, we have the capacity to greatly expand this programme. So I think at the beginning of the year, we were feeding about 35,000 children. Even whilst we were there in this recent visit, we were expanding to nearer 50,000 children. The very generous response to our appeal these last few weeks have enabled us to go back and talk to the sisters there about a plan to expand the game. So right now, we're working on implementing an expansion that will see us add another 50,000 children to the program. It'll take us over 100,000 children in Tigray, and that's just wonderful that we've been able to translate an appeal that only started a few weeks ago into new children fed so quickly is obviously a wonderful thing. However, you know, there's so much more to do. In Tigray, there's probably about 2 million children in need of school. That number's maybe bigger than you'd expect in a population of 5 million, but there's actually, because of the war and before that, the pandemic lockdowns that closed schools, there's a whole cohort of children who haven't been in school for 4 or 5 years now. So there's a backlog of children as well as the children that would normally be in school right now. And I was really shocked actually to learn, talking to the local government there, that Mary's Meals is in fact the biggest provider of school meals in Tigray. In fact, not only are we the biggest provider of school meals, our program's bigger than all the other school feeding programs put together. And one of the striking things about the Tigray situation for me is there are other organisations there doing good work of different sorts, but not at the scale I would expect at all. I really think we are very painfully aware that there are many crises unfolding in the world today, clamouring for our attention and maybe not getting it. But I think Tigray might be the most extreme example of that, where people are predicting a famine that could be worse than the famous one of the 1980s, in which 1 million people died. Now, please God, that can be averted this time, but it really does need a new intervention at a different scale and very fast. So it's wonderful that we're already expanding the programme there and reaching so many extra children, but there's just so much more to do beyond where we've already reached, and our partners there are ready to go. And the food's available. It's not available in the perfect way we would like. As you know, we like to buy food very locally to help the farmers in the local communities to support the economy. Right now, that's not possible for the reasons I mentioned earlier, given the challenges around food production in Haiti. But we are able to move food in from other parts of Ethiopia. So, you know, everything's there in terms of what we need to be able to expand this program rapidly, but we don't have the funds to go beyond where we are, where that expansion that we've currently reached, and that's why we continue this appeal. It's why we're so grateful for you being interested in this. One thing, and I'll maybe just finish this and hand back to Terry, but one of the things that we were doing in Tigray, and I think one of the reasons maybe why there's been so little media coverage, I think there's a few reasons, because there's a very difficult political situation around this, is that right now it's almost impossible, or is impossible, for media to get journalist visas to visit Tigray and to report. We did have a film crew with us when we were in Tigray, and we filmed a lot of the experiences that we're talking about and many other experiences, and some amazing interviews with these incredible people that we've talked about. And we're in the midst of making a documentary that will tell the story that will be available soon. So we hope very much that that's going to have some kind of impact, and that we can play our part in raising awareness, because we feel this, I would say, obligation to play our part in that, you know, beyond our most immediate desire, which is to raise more funds to feed more children in Tigray. We want to raise awareness more generally, or at least contribute to that, that the people of Tigray might not be forgotten. And I said that was going to be the final thing. I just want to finish on, I've mentioned a couple of times just how amazing the people of Tigray are, and that can just sound like we're just saying some nice words. We say that generally about the people we meet wherever we go, and we do, because people are generally amazing. But in Tigray, there's something really remarkable going on that I just felt like we could all learn so much from in the world right now. you know, because we were making that documentary, I had the job of sort of interviewing people, having conversations with people while we were filming, and over again, when we were hearing these horrendous stories of what people have experienced there in terms of these atrocities, in the same conversation, hearing those same people talk about forgiveness, I choose to forgive the people that did that to me, or those people who killed members of my family. I choose to forgive them, and I found myself asking them, how can you possibly say that or think about that at this stage? And repeatedly, the answer was, because all we want here is peace. That's all we want for our children, and for our future. We need a real peace, and for there to be a real peace, we need to forgive. We need to forgive the people that did that. We need to do it not just for them, or not even as much for them, as we need to do it for ourselves. We need to really genuinely forgive, and you know, learning about that, their willingness to forgive, and seeing their charity that they are practicing over and over again. You know, I think so often those of us involved in this kind of work can start to feel quite uncomfortable sometimes when it's positioned like we are doing all the giving from outside, and people in a situation like that are just passively waiting for us. They're not in any of the places we work, and they're certainly not in Tigray. They are doing everything they possibly can to share with each other, and to keep people alive. And I just came away with this overwhelming sense, because apart from those characteristics of the Tigrayan people, there also are people who are incredibly well educated, with this very deep set of values about what it is to be human. I got the most surprising answer sometimes when I asked sort of the opening basic question in some of those camps, in that classroom where 20 people are living in a horror. And I asked the gentleman the first question, and his first answer was, how can people made in the likeness and image of God be living like this? And over again, I just heard this use of words and this way of expressing themselves with such dignity and with such a profound understanding of what it is to be human, and how important it is to retain our humanity even in situations like that. So that's why, one of the reasons why I said at the beginning that Shona and I and the others who came with us feel this very real sense of privilege, having just spent a few weeks in Tigray. And I hope, what we certainly learned there might come through a little bit in that documentary that we're making, as well as maybe moving people to act, which is what we want first and foremost. It might make us think a little bit about some broader issues in the world today, and maybe to think about that question of, famines don't happen overnight, ever. They're always months, more often years in the making. This one certainly is. The human family as a whole always has ample opportunity to intervene. That's why famines should long ago be a thing of the past, never mind our broader battle to try and achieve zero hunger. Famines should have no place in the 21st century. So I can't think of a more profound collective failing of humanity than to let a famine occur. And yet that's what we're watching right now in Tigray. So maybe I'll stop at that. Maybe I've gone on a little bit too long, but I think it would be impossible for us to, if we wanted to exaggerate the situation in Tigray today. And so I thank you really so much for making time to come and listen to us.
Thank you, Magnus, so much. And Shona, Magnus, the fact that you've been to so many different places that are, hard to go to, and this is the worst that you've seen, that says a lot. And it really does kind of set that stage for just how bad of a crisis this really is. But I know neither one of you will ever forget this visit that you guys just came back from, but we really do appreciate that you've been here to share with us all those stories and putting names to the faces of those children and knowing that they're there and that they're going through what they're going through really does bring it home. So thank you for doing that. Before we get into the questions though, there's been a couple of people that have asked how they can help. So I want to just mention 3 different ways of how you can help. And Magnus touched on this briefly, but the first thing is to share the stories you've heard today. We really need people to be talking about this. It's not in the news right now. We just need you to talk about it. And then once you get the recording, share the recording with your family and friends and just educate everybody on what's actually happening in Tigray. That's the number one thing you can do. The second thing, of course, is if you feel called to do so, is to donate by visiting our websites. Here in the US, you would go to marysmillsusa.org to donate, or if you're calling in from Canada, it would be marysmills.ca. And then if you can't get into either one of those sites, if you're calling from another country, which I do know that we have a few people on that are not from the US and Canada, just simply go to marysmills.org and you will be able to find where you can give. And finally, we need people of all faiths to be praying for peace, for the leaders of Ethiopia, for our partners that are delivering the food and serving the food, but mostly for the children of Tigray. And just, they're desperately needing help right now. And so they just need to be thought of on a regular basis. Okay, so let's move into the questions. Let me see. Okay, we have a lot of really good questions from Ethiopia, but before we jump into that, Magnus, there's been some questions about Haiti. Haiti is on the news all the time here in the US, and we have donors here that are very involved with what's happening in Haiti, and they would love to hear an update from you on where we are.
Yeah, no, thank you for that, because I definitely wouldn't want to give the impression that, because we're so moved by the Tigray situation and doing so much for that we're forgetting about those other places of very acute needs right now, and Haiti is most certainly one of those. And it's clearly a very, very difficult and fast-moving situation. In our program in Haiti, we feed about 175,000 children. So it's a big program. We work with 3 different partners. They are in different areas of Haiti. All of them have been affected by this in different ways. Remarkably, though, they are all still operating, our partners. But there are some things out with our control, school closures primarily, which stop us delivering our program 100% as we would normally. Our latest estimation was that about 70% of our normal school feeding is taking place because of those school closures, and varying depending on what region of Haiti. So our partners are working in Port-au-Prince, the capital, are more badly affected because the civil unrest is more severe there, whereas our partners who work up in the Central Plateau less so, and they're more able to deliver a normal program. Thankfully, there are other challenges around food supply, food procurement, and certainly it's another place that needs our prayers, because a bit like Tigray, we need peace, don't we, and stability in every way. And maybe just, in mentioning Haiti, there are sadly some other enormous humanitarian crises going on where we work as well in other parts of the world. So even in Malawi, our biggest program, where we feed 1 million children every day, the government there, just in the last few weeks, has declared a state of emergency because of the chronic food insecurity across most of that country. Next door in Zambia and Zimbabwe, in that region, similar. The war in South Sudan goes on, and we're working with these amazing partners there, working right on the front line of that situation as well. And I could go on, so there are many places, and we don't forget about any of them while we choose to put a bit of a spotlight on Tigray right now. It doesn't mean that we're forgetting about those or neglecting those in any way whatsoever.
Thank you, Magnus. Thank you. All right, I'm going to jump into the first question for Ethiopia. All right, what else needs to happen in Ethiopia besides our feeding program to help solve this crisis?
I mean, and any of these, Shona, feel free to come in if you want to add anything. Just, I think what we just mentioned, I think we need a lasting peace. It needs to be a just peace. A situation, by that I mean where people can go back to their homes, those million people that are stuck in their camps, where they can, all they want is to go back and restart their farming or whatever it was they were doing that made a living to feed their families. That's all they want. But the starting point for that is that peace and justice that's always required as a starting point. And then there are other types of development that are required beyond our school feeding program. But I think, as we all know, it has to start there. It has to start with kids in school being fed every day, and then other things become possible.
That's great. Thank you. Okay, so you touched on this one a little bit, and I was a teen in the 80s, so I remember Live Aid, and I remember all of the conversations in TV about the famine in the 80s. The question is asking, though, is Tigray experiencing a famine like the one in the 80s, or do you think it's not at that point yet?
Yeah, no, it's a good question, and very much mine, of the generation that, very much remembers Live Aid as a teenager and everything that went with that. And I actually had an interesting experience of meeting Bob Geldof, the man behind all that, the Irish rock star. We did an interview with him to be part of this documentary that I mentioned, just to ask him that question, and also it came up over and over again in Tigray itself. People who are old enough to remember the famine of the 1980s. So many of them, and maybe that's the most important voice, were volunteering their belief that they thought this could be worse than the one that they remember in the 1980s. And it was catastrophic. I think I mentioned earlier, 1 million people eventually lost their lives. Now, there's nothing inevitable about that, though. Please God, that won't happen at that scale again this time. But it requires us to act, and many other people to act, to avert that. So yeah, it's kind of a disturbing comparison, isn't it, in many ways, but both in terms of the level of hunger on the ground, but also when we think about the fact that the whole world kind of rallied around that situation in the 1980s, and everyone was talking about it, and there was just this outpouring of action around the world to do something about it. And this time, it's not only that there's no action, it seems like no one's really noticed as yet. So it's painful making the comparison in a way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when we were there, it was a question and a topic, as Magnus says, that really came up quite a lot. And we did say to some people, would you say this was worse than the famine of the 80s or not? And there's a very strict and clear set of criteria that have to be met to officially declare something as a famine. But certainly the communities that we met were talking about it very much like it was that was the case, and that it was worse, in fact. But Elizabeth, the woman that I mentioned before, who works for her partner there, I asked her that question, and I said, how does this compare? Do you think this is worse than before? And she got understandably quite, angry about it. And she said, why does it matter if it's the same or worse? Why does it matter if what matters is that children are dying right now because of hunger, and that's all that really matters. And that was certainly the kind of, the thing that stayed with me after the visit, for sure.
Yeah, that's really powerful. Really powerful. Thank you. All right, let me see. Is Mary's Mills only feeding in schools at this point? Are we feeding anywhere else? Is there some sort of feeding program outside of the schools happening, or is it just in schools?
No, at this point, it's back to school feeding. So during the war, we were, as I think Shona mentioned, we were doing emergency feeding while schools were closed, and helping those communities of displaced people. And they were expressing their gratitude for that very, very much. But thankfully, we're back to what we want to be doing and what we do best, which is feeding children in school.
Great. Thank you, Magnus. All right. I think we have time for this one last one. And it is, how do you decide which schools Mary's Mills would provide meals for? How does that process work?
Yeah. Well, maybe stepping back globally, because that's like a very difficult thing we have to work through pretty much on a weekly basis, like requests for Mary's Meals to come to new countries, to come to new communities in the countries in which we're in. And the starting point is always need. Where's the greatest need? And then having established that the place in question is in the category of very, very acute need, we'll then look at, well, can we deliver a program there well? Do we have the partners? Do we have all those things, all those components that are required to deliver a really good Mary's Meals program? And then there are, at a more local level, there are other considerations around clustering or covering districts or regions at a time, because when you leave gaps, you tend to get migration of children leaving schools and even walking miles to another school where the meals are being served. So it's also about trying to roll out across districts at a time, so we have universal coverage as well. But it's a very it's not the easiest part of this job for the teams making decisions about that, because especially when we have a situation like Tigray where there are so many more schools than we can feed right now, it's not an easy thing. And Sister Medine, one of the sisters there, our partner, talks about that very movingly, just her anguish at having to make choices every day about who to help with the limited resources at any one moment in time.
Thank you, Magnus. That's a hard decision to make. There are so many people in need. Yeah. So thank you, and the team who have to work through that. All right. Well, thank you, Magnus and Shona, for sharing your firsthand experience while you were there. It really does mean a lot for all of us to be able to hear your experience on the ground, since we're not hearing that much about it here. I also want to thank everybody who's attended today on the webinar, and everyone who may be listening later. Thank you for taking that time out to just be here and spend time with us. Keep an eye out for the link in the recording. You should see an email coming through. Please make sure to share it with your family and friends. And I'm going to just share the slide again of the ways that you can help as a reminder, but I just want to say thank you again. And I hope that you all have a wonderful, wonderful day. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.